Okay, so now that we know that really the lion's share of carbon dioxide emissions come from household energy usage, electricity generation, and transportation, today we're going to focus on electricity generation as well as household electricity use. Or at least for this module, we're going to focus on those things. So here in the United States, and this is data as of 2028, which is a little outdated now. As I'm recording this in 2021, but it's still good enough. For electricity generation, we could switch to greener technologies. And I really want to be careful here when I use that term greener technologies, because obviously green is a very vague term. What I specific technologies that have no net or very little net carbon input to them. This includes things such as nuclear power, which I know is a very controversial topic, and it'll actually be the main topic of this week's module. Nuclear power, solar power, wind power, hydrothermal power, hydroelectric power, geothermal power, those kind of things, those things that create electricity without combustion. Or if they do use combustion in the case of biomass, they're releasing carbon that was actually taken in that biomass. And basically it's going out as quickly as it's coming in. And so even though we are burning that stuff, it would actually decompose mostly on its own anyway. So but that's one of the reasons why biomass is considered renewable. We can make more of it. And it actually has very little, almost net zero carbon emissions to it. Here in the United States, approximately 63% of all of our electricity generation is from the burning of fossil fuels. 35% natural gas, 27% coal, and 1% petroleum. If I count my fingers and my toes properly, that's 63%. And then the remaining 36% or 37%-ish comes from nuclear and other renewable energy sources. So how does that compare to California? Well, the reality is California is doing way better. We are doing way better. Whereas the nation was getting 19% of their energy from renewable sources. Actually, yeah, 17%, sorry. I kind of got that mixed up there for a second. Just proof that I don't memorize these numbers. But whereas the nation was getting 17% from renewables, California is getting 36% from renewables. 36% from renewables. And actually, 63% of all of our energy comes from non-carbon releasing, non-fossil fuel sources. That includes renewables, as well as things that aren't considered renewable, but also don't have a carbon footprint, such as hydroelectric and nuclear. And I'll talk about those two, and I'll talk about why we don't consider them renewable in a few minutes. And here in California, we get a lot of our electricity from solar generation. And in fact, solar generation is approximately 19% of all electricity generation here in California. And that was up from 5% in 2014, and actually up from less than 1% in 2009. So over a 10-year period, we have seen an explosion in solar production. And this wind farm back here is one of the reasons why. 17% comes from hydroelectric. One of the reasons we don't consider hydroelectric to be renewable is that it's very, very dependent on rainfall. And if you've lived here in California the last 10 years, you know that our rainfall has been not as reliable. Less water, less hydroelectricity, because we don't get as much water moving through our dams. And unfortunately, that causes problems. And then approximately 10% of all of our energy comes from nuclear sources. So approximately 10% come from nuclear sources. 36% total come from renewable sources. And in fact, I used to actually include hydroelectric in renewable. And if I were to include that now, it would be roughly 53% approximately. So we are getting the lion's share of our energy from non-fossil fuel sources, which is excellent here in California. That is really, really good news. Now, with that being said, it is actually written in law. Assembly Bill 32, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, stipulates that California needs to actually have 50% of its electricity generated using renewable technologies by 2030. However, we have been doing so good with that goal, and we have been exceeding our benchmarks every single year. We've been beating it and beating it, beating it, that we actually said, you know what, let's be ambitious. And so in 2016, Governor Jerry Brown at the time, this is before Gavin Newsom, Mr. Shutdown Man, became governor, he actually signed a bill into law that actually revised that up to 60% because we're doing so well. And the goal is to actually eventually become not just carbon neutral, but actually carbon negative, meaning that we are taking out more carbon than we're putting in. That would be really exciting if we actually did that. So it, as a whole, is doing better than the rest of the nation. So in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the non-renewable electricity generation sources, and then we'll get into kind of those gray area ones, and then we'll talk about renewables. So that's what to look forward to in our next video.